Tales of mysterious creatures unknown to man and science has been around for a very long time. One of the most famous of these creatures is Bigfoot, otherwise known as Sasquatch. There are many accounts of Bigfoot, ranging from historical to modern video and photo evidence of the creature. Me, myself, I'm a little skeptical of the existence of a modern Bigfoot, just like how I'm skeptical of most ghost stories. However, I find them very fascinating, and honestly, I do enjoy the occasional History Channel episode of Finding Bigfoot. One of the most interesting sightings of Bigfoot actually comes from a United States president, that president being Theodore Roosevelt. In this video, I'm going to go over Theodore Roosevelt's account of Bigfoot in a novel that he wrote called The Wilderness Hunter, as well as look at some of the more modern tellings of people encountering Bigfoot, which are a little bit more humorous than Theodore Roosevelt's. Theodore Roosevelt's is a very well-written account of an old hunter slash tracker running into an unknown creature, not even labeled Bigfoot, although we can account it to Bigfoot. We'll get into that later. And it is very, honestly, unsettling and scary. This encounter with Bigfoot takes place on the border between Idaho and Montana. And as this is Montana after midnight, I thought it'd be cool to go into the most famous Bigfoot sighting written down by a US president that happened in Montana. I hope you guys enjoy. Let's get into it. If you guys are new to the channel, this is Montana After Midnight, where we go over creepy, mysterious, paranormal things that happened in the Big Sky state of Montana. This is the third big video that I've done on this channel, the others being a trip to Garnet Ghost Town, one of the most historical and well-preserved ghost towns in the state of Montana, as well as a description / documentary on the night of the Grizzlies. Both of these videos are very entertaining, and I highly recommend you check them out after this video is done. This video, however, focuses on Bigfoot sightings in Montana. If this sounds interesting to you, make sure to subscribe, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Before I get into the story written by Theodore Roosevelt in his book, The Wilderness Hunter, which is a story that recounts an old trapper's younger days where he ran into a mysterious figure, I want to go over some facts about Theodore Roosevelt and the location where this sighting apparently occurred. As it's been a while since my 8th grade history class, I wanted to look up and reevaluate some facts about Theodore Roosevelt. Some of them are pretty freaking crazy. One, which I remember hearing from my teacher who explained that Theodore Roosevelt was his favorite president, was that he was shot and then proceeded to give a speech after he was shot, knowing that he wasn't going to fatally die due to his hunting and wilderness experience, which makes sense because Theodore Roosevelt wrote very many books about hunting and surviving for a woodland man. I don't know if that's a good term to use, but woodland man. Theodore Roosevelt also won a Nobel Prize, and unfortunately, his wife and mother died on the same day, which is extremely tragic. Maybe that's not a fun fact, but an interesting fact. Maybe a sad fact. We'll call that one a sad fact. Another fact that really surprised me was that he was the youngest president ever, which I would not pin him for. I would think maybe Kennedy was the youngest president ever, but in fact, it was Theodore Roosevelt. The final thing about Theodore Roosevelt is that he had a ranch in North Dakota. He really fit this cowboy aesthetic more so than any other president that I've looked up and seen, which I think is really cool, and also kind of ties into the whole Montana theme of this YouTube channel, and of course, this story taking place in Montana. Before diving into Theodore Roosevelt's Bigfoot story, I wanted to look at the origin or lore of Bigfoot in modern-day North America. I'm getting all this information from the History Channel, which is kind of ironic because the History Channel always makes these ancient aliens / finding Bigfoot shows, but I'm getting the history or lore from the History Channel's website. Sasquatch actually predates Bigfoot, being more of a Canadian folktale that goes back to the early 1900s, 1930s, where Bigfoot actually starts in the 1950s. It was actually 1958 where some loggers found some footprints that they could not identify, which they said belonged to a Bigfoot. This was then written in an article by Andrew Gonzalez. Andrew said that he didn't think this story was going to get as popular as it did, making for a good Sunday morning news article, but instead it caught the nation by storm. Eventually, even TV shows were offering rewards for finding Bigfoot. One TV show named Truth or Consequence offered a $1,000 reward for evidence of Bigfoot. From there, in the 1970s, there was paperback novels, magazines, and even some documentaries going over the man-beast, the creature of the night, Bigfoot, where in the 80s, it seems like Bigfoot found his softer side in the media, where people thought of him as more of a creature tied to the environment and a natural animal in the wilderness. Of course, Bigfoot is still debated to this day if he is real or if he is just a man-made hoax. And now in hindsight, looking at some historical accounts like the Theodore Roosevelt story of Bauman the trapper in the Montana/Idaho woods, did they run into Bigfoot as this unknown creature that did not have a name yet? Now let's talk about the story where Theodore Roosevelt supposedly wrote about Bigfoot. It's important to say that the monster was not called Bigfoot in this story, and it isn't Theodore Roosevelt's first-hand account of seeing Bigfoot, although there is some theory crafting that we can get into later after reading the story. The person that actually saw and dealt with this shadowy creature was a man named Bauman. Bauman was a young trapper at the time who had a partner that decided to trap near the Salmon River. This was a river that bordered between Idaho and Montana. Bauman and his partner decided to trap on a new trail that they had never been up before. There was even a story about a man last year being mauled to death by a beast up this trail. Both of these men, being experienced and not weak-willed, weren't very scared of this story and decided to continue on the path. They rode up a portion of the path, but had to leave their horses behind when there was a more climbing-intensive section. They hiked for a couple hours, finally deciding on a spot to make camp. The location where they decided to make their camp was near a stream, which they spent the rest of the daylight hours exploring, walking up the stream and then eventually coming back to camp. While they were walking up the stream, in those couple hours that they were gone, they realized that their camp had been raided. The likely culprit of the creature rummaging through their camp would have been a grizzly or a black bear, both very common in Montana and not necessarily an uncommon thing for them to do. In fact, nowadays there are a lot of rules when camping out in the wilderness in bear country, a lot of them being not to cook food at your campsite and to keep your food at least 100 yards away and tied up in a tree or in your car. We also nowadays have the pack in, pack out rules, which if you want to know why those are a thing, I highly recommend watching my Night of the Grizzlies video. The men, of course, being frustrated with their camp being rummaged through, put everything back into normal order, and then took a closer inspection at the footprints. These footprints did not seem to be those of a bear, and more interestingly, it did not seem like this creature was walking on 4 legs, but instead 2. And I imagine that they're able to distinguish this because they are experienced trappers, and you'll be able to tell if they're walking on 2 legs or 4. And in the story, it says that this creature was definitely walking on 2 legs. Also, it's important to say that at this point in the story, it is alluded to that these could not be human feet. It must be some other creature entirely. After fixing up the camp, it was late and both men decided to retire for the night. In the middle of the night, Bauman woke up to a beastly smell and a shadowy figure standing outside of his lean-to. That's where he reached for his rifle, pulled it out, took a shot, and the beast rushed into the night. There is no clear depiction of what the beast looked like, but that it was a shadowy, tall figure standing over him. The next day, the men woke up and had to check their beaver traps that they set up along the stream the day prior. While checking all of the traps, they stuck very close together, scared of whatever else was out there. Returning to their camp in the evening, they find it completely ran through again, trashed by whatever this creature was that was stalking them. They decided that one person should stay up by the fire, keeping it roaring while the others slept, taking turns throughout the night. Around midnight, the men could hear the creature stirring around their camp, every once in a while from the shadows, making a deep, grating moan, which they found, of course, to be extremely unsettling. Fortunately for them, they did not encounter the beast that night, and woke up the next morning deciding that they needed to get far away from that camp. However, they needed to collect their traps, which were still laid out along the stream in a nearby pond. So, the men, sticking together, went down the stream and picked up each of their traps. While collecting their traps, there was a sense that they were being watched, and the occasional sound could be heard from behind them, but ultimately they felt safe in the daylight. Around noon, with the sun high in the sky, it actually felt kind of silly to these experienced wilderness men that they were so scared to be in the woods. And with only 3 traps remaining, Bauman elected to go recover them himself from a nearby pond, while his partner would collect all their things at camp so they'd be ready to leave. For the first time in this trip, they actually caught beavers in their traps. There was a beaver in each one of the 3 that were laid out in this pond that Bauman went to collect, which meant that he had to clean and organize his kills so that they would be preserved and ready for the trip back. This took him a couple of hours to do, and by the time he was done, it was starting to get dark out. This, of course, made him feel uneasy as he rushed to get back to his partner at camp. As Bauman got closer to camp, he started yelling, but heard no response, and that the fire had been untended to, eventually going out, and his partner was nowhere to be seen. As Bauman moved and looked through the camp, he eventually found his friend laying on a fallen tree. The body still warm, but his neck broken and twisted. There was also fang marks found on his throat. The beast footprints seemed to tell the story. Bauman's partner had packed up camp and decided to rest on the fallen tree, facing the fire and away from the woods. The beast, walking on 2 legs, silently crept up behind him, eventually twisting his neck back, breaking it, and killing his partner. Then the beast dug its fangs into his partner's neck, sucking some of its blood out, but not eating his partner, instead deciding to roll and romp around his corpse, sometimes even rolling and smashing into it, only to scurry into the night before Bauman was able to make it back to camp. At this point, Bauman picked up his rifle and with only that ran all the way back to where he left his pony tied up and then rode the pony down the path further away from this beastly creature that has taken his partner's life. And that right there is the end to the story that Theodore Roosevelt wrote about Bauman in The Wilderness Hunter. Now, there are a couple comments that I want to make about this particular story. One is that with the history lesson that I gave you on Bigfoot earlier, you would know that this was written before Bigfoot really got his name. So this creature goes unlabeled, just being a black shadowy figure that stands on 2 legs. It's also alluded to in the beginning of the story that the creature could be goblin-like due to Bauman's German ancestry and how he kind of played off of German folklore, making him think it was more goblin-esque than Bigfoot-esque. However, it is still widely regarded as the time Theodore Roosevelt mentioned Bigfoot, the time a president of the United States wrote about Bigfoot. Kind of cool, definitely an interesting fact, and a little interesting tidbit of Montana history, knowing that a president believed a man enough to add it to one of his hunting and wilderness books that there's a Bigfoot-like creature roaming around by the Salmon River. Now, as always, I'm going to leave all my sources in the comments so you can check out those individual videos, which includes a couple different YouTube videos that read the actual story that Theodore Roosevelt wrote. And I'm also going to be citing the PDF version of Theodore Roosevelt's The Wilderness Hunter, because it is actually out there. That's how old this book is. And you guys can look at the story yourself. Also, in one of the videos that I watched, they talked about the fact that Bauman could be a stand-in for young Theodore Roosevelt himself. Bauman and Theodore Roosevelt, when writing The Wilderness Hunter, were both older men. However, this is Bauman's story of when he was a younger, less experienced trapper, which people have concluded this may actually be Theodore Roosevelt putting a stand-in so it's not directly tied to his name. There are a couple reasons for this, mainly because the way that this story was written was unique and slightly out of flavor for the rest of the book. In terms of the book, I've only read about the first 2 chapters, and like I said, it was very well written, and I might continue reading it, and I'm excited to get to the chapter to see for myself if I actually believe that it is different and out of character, and maybe there is something to Bauman actually being Theodore Roosevelt. But going off of face value, this is just Bauman's story that Theodore Roosevelt trusted enough to write about. Overall, in terms of Bigfoot stories, I really like this one. For one, it was written very well. Another thing is the creature isn't super well described, similar to the original Bigfoot story where they just found footprints at a logging site. The most detail we get about this creature is that its footprints were in their campsite, and its footprints told the story of Bauman's friend being mauled to death. This is opposed to snapshot photos of a random brown spot in the middle of a field, or a grandiose story written about how someone shook hands with Bigfoot that you get nowadays. Instead, we get a scary story, maybe even a good campfire story to tell if you're ever in that situation, of a mysterious monster coming in the middle of the night, stalking these 2 experienced men, leaving only one of them alive to tell the tale. This first one is a video of people checking out their night vision camera when all of a sudden a creature runs across their screen.
It's a screen. Look at that. You can literally drive the car with your lights off. Usually, what's that on the right side, dude? Get me the hell off this truck. Stop so I can get in the truck! What the hell is that thing? Open the door!
Now, of course, this one is a little over dramatic. It's a quick clip. It's fun. It got a lot of views. And of course, in the comments, everyone is saying that it is fake. More interestingly, there's this video that to me seems almost AI. It's either an old guy that has never talked online before and is trying to sound real and good, or it is literally just AI.
I seen a Bigfoot about 2 years ago on the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana. Tried getting a video, but it wouldn't focus. But we did get a few pictures.
However, in this video, which is literally him just driving down a Montana back road that has a clip at the end that supposedly you see Bigfoot, which I don't really see him.
It was definitely something to see, and the pictures tell many stories.
All the comments are super favorable, or at least the ones that I saw when I found it, saying things like, "Thank you for sharing this," and "You basically can't keep Bigfoot a secret." Interesting to see these 2 different types of videos coming out in Montana about Bigfoot in a more modern day. But in a juxtaposition to this Theodore Roosevelt story, it makes me appreciate it and how well of a writer Theodore Roosevelt was. And I actually have a goal of owning my own copy of The Wilderness Hunter because it was such a fun read and I did enjoy making this video. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and this episode of Montana After Midnight. I do have 2 other videos that I'm very proud of, all centering around Montana and different creepy or eerie things that have happened here. The Night of the Grizzlies is probably the most intensive video project that I've ever made, so I highly recommend you check that out. And if ghost towns are more your flavor, I have a video on that too. Anyway, have a good one. This has been Montana After Midnight.